Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. At times I've been asked about various different things like costumes and hair and makeup and even hats. So today I thought I would do just a little bit of a brief glimpse at some of the unusual, the slightly amusing, and the fabulous hats that we got to enjoy on the Waltons. If you're enjoying these, please do hit like and subscribe. Within the actual family, there wasn't an opportunity for a lot of variety with hats, nor did the girls wear hats all that much when we were young. Olivia had one or two hats that she wore pretty regularly, as did Grandma. Grandma had a straw hat, and Olivia had a little bit of a, sort of close-fitting hat that she wore. Really, in some of the later episodes was when we finally saw a little variation, and also we saw Aaron and Mary Ellen begin to wear hats a bit more. Of course, early on for Mary Ellen, there was the fabulous straw hat that I got to wear starting right from the beginning in the episode The Hunt. I love that straw hat. In later seasons, I always thought the hat I wore in The Tempest, I always called it my little Peter Pan hat, the little green hat that I wore. That one always made me chuckle. In The Spirit, we saw a number of us wearing hats at a church meeting. I was wearing sort of a knit hat, as was Elizabeth. Miss Emily had on an interesting hat, and Corabeth did also. In The Home Front, when Mary Ellen and Aaron were at church, we saw hats once again, and then again with Olivia and Corabeth. In the episode The Innocents, we saw an opportunity for Elizabeth and Amy to be trying on hats, and we did see Amy throw on a few hats here and there, and likely the influence of Corabeth. In season 4's episode The Sermon, we saw Mrs. Brimmer in this hat. And then, of course, John Boy had his hat. And also, again, another of Mrs. Brimmer, and this time with Corabeth. Some of the best hats that were worn were by the Baldwin Sisters and Corabeth. Some examples of the Baldwins. In The Sermon, we saw their hats. In The Pledge, we saw them in hats when they were at Ike and Corabeth's store. In The Captive, once again, the Baldwins in different hats. And then in the episode The House, and also The Last Mustang. Of course, in The Test was when Olivia went to work for Stella Lewis, and because she had made these wonderful dresses for the Baldwin sisters, so they also got to add these fabulous hats to that particular occasion. And Stella Lewis herself showed up at the house in a rather wonderful outfit with a very smart hat. Elvira Drummond was another guest star who wore fabulous clothes and the occasional wonderful hat as well. Corabeth had lots of opportunities to wear hats, both more normal, more casual hats in the beginning. In The Matchmakers, of course, she's wearing just a pretty dreadful hat and is not supposed to look particularly attractive. She's not being played up at all. But as the seasons went on, Corabeth developed more and more fashion sense, at least her own fashion sense. And I thought she got to wear some great clothes and certainly some great hats. In The Captive, she had a wonderful hat. In The Whirlwind, we see her in another hat. In The Hostage, in The Medal, The Valediction, in The Home Front with Amy in the store, in The Pledge, Corabeth with the Baldwins, and we see 3 of their hat options there. In The Lumberjack, this was during the period of time, I think, when she was doing real estate or something. And Ike has on a really silly hat himself. Most of the men wore pretty regular hats, a lot of sort of these type of, but with, sort of the fedora type. Continuing on with Corabeth, in The Lumberjack, she also wore this hat in the store and also this hat. Our final episode in season 9, The Revel, gave us an opportunity to see Aaron heading off to New York and wearing a rather smart hat. Of course, she had worn, there was the whole sequence in The Lumberjack where Mary talked about how there was something going on with her hair, and so they just shoved it under a hat. But then she was heading out to see Paul, and they said, oh, no, she can't get engaged wearing a hat. And so they then totally curled her hair, but in order to match, she had to arrive to the scene with the hat on and then take it off and shake out her hair like a shampoo commercial. And she had all this fabulous hair stuffed under it so that they could have this lovely moment of Erin looking stunning as always. But in the revel, she goes to New York to check on John Boy and wears a rather smart hat to go visit him. And then we saw a number of wonderful hats on the Baldwins, a real sequence of their hats throughout that episode. Of course, it was the responsibility of the wardrobe department to research what would be appropriate hats for the era, and also based on the characters. They weren't necessarily the newest hats for a family like the Waltons or Flossie Brimmer or other members of the community. You had Verdi Grant, who always wore turbans. The members of the community who didn't have a lot of money would not be able to change their hats with the latest fashion all the time, hence why Grandma and Olivia wore the same hats a lot. They had one or two hats, and those were their hats. And early on, same thing for Mary Ellen. She had a straw hat. Not that it mattered that she was wearing a hat, but she wore a hat. The men, pretty much had a hat. John Boy had his sort of cap that he wore at times, as did Jason had sort of a cap. And I think Ben may have also when he was younger. But they had to the wardrobe department had to keep track of the correct hats for the era, and also had to know when members of the family, men and women, should be wearing hats. When they wore them outside, when they wore them inside, all those sorts of things. Because I certainly wasn't keeping track of it. If they gave me a hat, I wore the hat. And if there was no hat with my wardrobe that I was putting on, then I didn't wear a hat. I never felt really compelled to go and discover the rules of wearing hats and what was the proper etiquette of that. But we relied greatly on our wardrobe department to keep us on track. I pulled out, I have a hat collection of my own, not anywhere near as much as a wardrobe department. Over the years, I've always really enjoyed hats, so I've kind of gathered them, but I don't end up wearing them that often, in particular if I'm traveling, because unless you wear the hat, it's hard to pack hats. They get a little, wrecked and being shoved in your suitcase. We are past the days when women traveled with their hat boxes. So that would be a little silly these days to have a whole stack of hat boxes to check in on an airplane. I'm sure all of you have some examples of what were some of your favorite hats over the course of the series, who you thought had the best hats, and what you thought was fun, what you thought was silly, what you really didn't like. So feel free to throw your hat comments in below. I'm curious who were your favorite hat wearers, and perhaps what were some of your favorites. And I hope you've enjoyed this fun little look at a very brief overview of hats on the Waltons. Of course, there's as many examples as there are episodes that we did. So clearly I have not even begun to touch on all the fabulous hats that were worn by members of the Waltons and our various different guests over the course of the seasons. Thanks for joining me for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. I will be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons and more Ask Judy. And if you have a question, throw them into the comments below and I'll try and take those up when I get a chance. Thanks for watching.